Okay, I want to speak a bit about the subject of Chinese nationalism and expansionism. I think both of these terms are appropriate because that is very clearly what we've been seeing in recent years. Of course, they're very closely linked, but I'm going to talk about sort of both of them separately, um, different parts of the video. I'm speaking in the context of this recent. Sorry, I'm just moving this to try and get good light. There we go. I'm speaking in the context of this recent arbitration case in the South China Sea. Now, from the outset, let me make it clear my country is not involved in this in any sense. We're not a Pacific nation and we have very little strategic interest in that region. We were once the world superpower, we're no longer that. That's history. You know, that is not really relevant in this video. It's history. Um, So, people can consider my Britishness as being part of my outlook on this if they want, but it's irrelevant because the British Empire is gone. So that's totally irrelevant. Um, Rather, I'm looking on as a concerned citizen of the world. Okay, so I'm not speaking as a British guy. I'm speaking as a citizen of the world here. For me, this is a difficult issue because I'm not a xenophobe. There's many, many things, and I know I say this every time, but it's truth. Many things I love about China. And my experience of the Chinese people has been mostly positive. Mostly. I'm not going to lie. I have experienced a very negative side as well. Um, on the positive side, I've experienced some very generous, open minded, and decent people who have been Chinese, mainland Chinese. I've also experienced some very aggressive, close minded nationalists who have been Chinese. Not in my own personal life, but online. Now, this arbitration case, I don't know enough about the details to go into the details, but as I understand it, it ruled in favor of the Philippines. Um, but of course, this is more than just between China and the Philippines. This is between China and most of its neighbors. Now, what I find striking about this is you can argue about the legalities of this, but I think that perception is extremely important, and China doesn't really seem to care about the perception. So, under the Xi administration, there's been this big focus on China's peaceful rise, but there's been very, very mixed messages in this. Take, for example, last year's VJ commemorations, massive military parade in Beijing. It was a complete double picture being sent out because, on one hand, massive military parade, tanks on display, weapons on display, and then there was this display at the end with all these doves being set into the air. And the message is clear. We, we're trying to send out this image of peace, but don't mess with us. Now, some would say that's good policy. It's kind of like getting a halfway house. I don't think it is. I think it's sending out a hostile message. And I get it. China's a powerful country. But to be quite honest, I get a little bit tired of the Chinese government playing the victim when they don't get their own way and saying, oh, stop picking on China. That's the perception they send out. Like they love to play the victim. Um, and yet, to be quite frank, they're coming across as the regional bully in Asia. Should say East Asia, but there's tensions with India as well. That's another issue. But they are coming across as the regional bully. And if it was just between China and the Philippines, you might think, okay, that's one thing. But does it seem plausible that all the countries that are in opposition to China right now are wrong? Does it seem plausible that it's all one big CIA conspiracy against China? Or maybe is it more plausible that the respective governments in the region genuinely have anxiety about China's expansionism? You can't just build islands in the Pacific and say, this is our territorial rights. The whole world has seen what China has been doing, literally building these islands, sending out young women onto them to try and boost their PR image like it's some sort of tourist resort, and then tell the world, oh, we're innocent. China is taking the world for fools, and they're winning no sympathy in the process. And this concerns me because I'm not a xenophobe. I don't want to see China in a state of war with its neighbours. Not that that's going to happen. I don't think it will. But it is unpleasant to see this developing, this neo-nationalism. Now, to be clear, I'm not entirely biased in favour of the Philippines. I don't get a very good impression from this new Filipino president. Of course, it's up to the Filipino people to decide who their leader is. I think Duterte is a demagogue. I think he's the Filipino Trump. His comments, for example, about raping the missionary were disgusting. And some of the messages that he sends out about extrajudicial killings are, frankly, very disturbing. He's a dictator in the making. That's how the message it sends out. He's going to be another Marcos, and Filipinos need to be very careful about that. It's up to them. I'm not for me to just tell people who their leaders should be. That's my honest opinion. I live in a country where freedom of expression is extremely important, and I will have my say. If you don't like it, fine, make another video, whatever. I'm not telling any other country what to do, but what you need to understand is that perception is the issue here. But yeah, back to this territorial dispute. Okay, let me play the devil's advocate for a second and say China is in the right, and this is actually their historic territory. Why then are they doing their best to turn as many countries as possible against them? Wouldn't you think that China would be trying to build bridges and make friends rather than just flexing its muscles and sending out the message that we don't really give a damn what the rest of the world thinks? Now, history shows that when countries isolate themselves, no matter how powerful those countries are, ultimately they lose. China is a powerful country, but it's not that powerful. It's not all powerful. No country, in fact, including the United States, is absolutely powerful. Every country, if it isolates themselves, at some point will regret it. And that is true because the United States, the most powerful country on earth, was humiliatingly defeated in Vietnam, a developing country. So China needs to learn the lessons from history. Yes, they're powerful. Yes, they have a huge army. Yes, they have growing confidence because of the improved economy and all the rest of it. Xi Jinping is a popular leader. He has consolidated more power than any president since Mao Zedong. There's all these factors. But what I would say to Chinese people is, with the greatest respect, if you're going online and shouting about how wonderful China is and how powerful China is and how dare you foreigners insult China, all you're doing is making China look like the bad guy. That's all you're doing. And the rest of the world is looking at China and seeing an incredibly obnoxious bully. And whether it is or it isn't, that is the perception. That is the perception. Okay, so the irony about this is the rights and wrongs of the argument go out the window as soon as the behavior and the perception of the behavior is what the rest of the world is seeing. That's why the rest of the world is going to back the Philippines, is going to back Vietnam, is going to back Taiwan, and I'm well aware of the debate about the one China and all the rest of it. But in the end of the day, if China doesn't stop acting like the regional bully, basically saying we can do whatever we want and we're going to ignore international law and we're going to build islands, I mean, who can you not see how stupid that is? Building these artificial islands in the Pacific Ocean, it's just stupid. I mean, my own theory on this is China simply doesn't care, and that is the attitude of a superpower. The United States has done similar things. So did Britain when we were the superpower. So in a sense, China is not learning from the mistakes of the United States and Britain. So for all their pontificating about, oh, you corrupt Westerners, and you British done this and you Americans done that, actually you're not learning from our mistakes, because you're showing the exact same arrogance and jingoism. And yeah, and the thing is, this is extended. It isn't just government policy, because a lot of online Chinese are exhibiting these extreme nationalistic tendencies, aggressively rounding on foreigners, going to other countries, waving the Chinese flag around, and basically saying you cannot criticize China. This is absurd. How would you feel if a group of Filipinos or a group of Vietnamese or whoever it was went to China and showed their nationalism in your country? You wouldn't like it one little bit. So my suggestion is, I'm not saying don't be patriotic, but I'm saying you need to be aware of how it comes across, and you cannot cry and say, oh, we're the victims, when you're acting like the bullies. Can you not see how it comes across? And the problem is, because so many people think with this jingoistic nationalistic mindset, they're incapable of sort of thinking about things reasonably. So they'll be watching this video, and they won't be thinking that this is a guy talking as a citizen of the world. They'll immediately be focusing on my nationality, which I've already said is irrelevant, because I've said the British Empire, for example, made huge mistakes, both morally and practically. But right now, China's acting like an empire. There's no question about it. This expansionism looks like imperialism. To an outsider, it looks like China is trying to take over Asia, basically. And Beijing can preach as much as it wants about, oh, this is the peaceful rise of China. It doesn't look very peaceful, okay? I'm not saying that China necessarily wants a war. I don't think it does. But right now, China is playing with fire. And I'm not saying that China's neighbors are innocent, okay? I think this is collective responsibility. So yes, the governments in Manila, Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh City, of course, the biggest city in Vietnam. Manila, Hanoi, Jakarta, all the regional powers, they all have responsibility. So I'm not just focusing on China. It is important that the other countries also play a role. And for what it's worth, I don't think at this time joint military exercises between the United States and the Philippines is particularly helpful. So I think the Americans should also be wary of that. But when China gets arrogant and says the United States and Australia have no right to an opinion, that's absurd. The United States and Australia are Pacific nations, whether they like it or not. Just look at a map of the world. They have Pacific coasts. So by definition, they are Pacific nations. And China cannot simply say, oh, we're the only ones allowed an opinion. This is absurd. If China doesn't like the ruling of this arbitration, then instead of just complaining about it, they need to be aware of how they are being perceived by the rest of the world. Because if they want the rest of the world to start to show sympathy to China, and I'm not even sure if they do at this point, I think it's a case of, oh, we're going to do whatever we want, to hell with the rest of the world. That's very stupid foreign policy. Every country that has ever done that has ended up losing. China's powerful, but it's not that powerful. And mark my words, if China insists on going down this route of isolating itself, then it's going to end in tears. And I don't want that. I actually don't want that, because I am not a xenophobe. I really like China. I don't want China to be in a situation of turmoil or in a state of war. I've got friends in China. If that happened, I'd be worried about them. I've also got friends in Vietnam and the Philippines. So yeah, that's perhaps why I'm interested in this, because I have friends in all three countries, especially in China, and I'm quite angry with the behavior of the Chinese government. I think it's absurd. This is the 21st century. but they're behaving like a 19th century European imperial power. You know, China today is behaving like Britain in the 1850s. That's the irony because they're always, they love to bring up the Opium Wars. They love to lecture Britain, but they're behaving exactly the same. So I'm going to round it up here. If you're Chinese, obviously you're not going to like what I'm saying. I'm well aware of how the Chinese government encourages nationalism online. I've seen it. Okay, I've had all the abuse on my videos and from people who have no reason whatsoever because all you want to do is blindly defend the CCP, make excuses for the CCP. China's a communist country, and you don't have any. You grew up with a communist education system, right? Chinese media is 100% controlled by the Communist Party. So this is the situation. And I'm not saying it's everyone. I have met plenty of open minded Chinese people. So I'm not saying everyone's like that. But it is something that I've noticed that there is this incredible nationalism. And sometimes it's aggressive. And that's very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. But I do think that if China continues behaving this way, other governments need to start standing up and saying to Chinese tourists, Chinese students, you're welcome here for trade, for education, whatever, but you need to respect this country. Because right now, like I say, China is coming across as as a regional bully. And it's a great pity because actually the rest of the world likes many things about China. All over the world people eat Chinese food. They like Chinese culture, all these things. But it's a bit like America. It's a love-hate relationship. The rest of the world sort of respects China for all its culture and all the rest of it. But at the same time, there is growing resentment towards China. And if you're truly a patriot, then you will self-reflect and consider how some of these things come across. The islands, for example, building artificial islands, there's no rational, there is no rational reason for that whatsoever. Patrolling the coast of China is one thing. That would be totally understandable. Every country does it. Building artificial islands hundreds of miles from the Chinese coastline is quite another. And I've looked at the boundaries that China is claiming. It's absurd. Okay? I don't know the legal details, but quite clearly, going right up to the Filipino coastline, like 20 miles or whatever it is, and claiming that to be Chinese territory is utterly absurd. So, rant over. If you think I'm anti China, you're wrong. Um, that's it. If you don't like what I'm saying, feel free to upload another video. Final few words. I'm not anti-China. Well, I've just said that, but I want to emphasize that I'm not anti-China, and I'm not saying that other countries don't have responsibility. They do. So the Philippines has responsibility, Vietnam has responsibility, but right now, China is coming across as a bad guy to the rest of the world, and they need to understand that. Beijing needs to understand that.